All right, welcome to another episode of New Wine Uncorked. Once again, I'm Matt Farlow, that's Tony Wynn, that's Phil Berlin, and we're stoked to be joining you for this continued discussion, theological discussion, societal discussion, cultural discussion, political discussion, especially in light of what's going on in today's culture. For those of you that are new to New Wine Uncorked, right below you, because you're seeing this on YouTube, just hit that subscribe button. That way, anytime that Phil, Tony, or I, as well as Dr. Metzger or Dr. Harper or Trudy or some of the other New Wine leaders uploads a video on YouTube, you will be notified. Also, head on over to Facebook /New Wine Skins and hit like on that page. And that way, when any one of us has an interaction going on, whether it be via blog or we also have a podcast, this becomes a podcast, and that way you'll be informed in it with these discussions that are going on. Last week we were talking about kingdom economics, and this week it's pouring into the idea of the politics of Jesus. We're 7 days away from the election for the president, and just this morning the confirmation of the new Supreme Court justice. I think she's the 105th or something like that justice. Seeing for many to tip the scales much more towards a conservative understanding of the legal system. The two main things that have been discussed are abortion and gay rights. And so actually three, right? And then the affordable care. Okay. And so what does that do? So if Jesus were alive today, which for a lot of the world, he's not, he's just some dead dude from the past. For the church, he should be alive based on our own acts. And yet most of our lives don't display the characteristics of Jesus. And so today's conversation is this continued talk of, well, what does this look like for the politics of Jesus? And I was talking to one of my classes last week, and it's a New Testament class, and we were talking about this Supreme Court justice, and we were talking about the flag, actually, and pledging allegiance to the flag. And I made a comment on Jesus calls us to an allegiance that does not allow another allegiance. And the amount of pushback I got was pretty extraordinary, saying, hey, look, I can be allegiant to this country as well as to God. And so I don't know, with your experiences and stuff, in my reading of the Bible, and look, I'm married, and I was telling these guys, my students, that even my allegiance to my wife draws me away from my allegiance to Christ. That is a hard American concept, because the nuclear family has so been elevated that it almost takes the place of the Godhead. It goes family, then maybe religion. And we were talking militaristically, we were talking in my class that, it goes God, country, but a lot of times it's not patriotism that leads us. It's this hyperbolic, nationalism that leads us. And so that it's not God, country, it's country, God, And so I was telling my students, the politics of Jesus will be such that anytime you speak of it, you are going to be an offense both to Republicans as well as Democrats. And so that when we go to the polls to vote, it should be a drawn out activity that we have had to prepare for the week before, because we've researched all the different issues, because we want to vote responsibly, because you can't choose one candidate who represents all of this, because no candidate on the Republican side or the Democrat side represents the truth of the kingdom, which to me says a whole lot about the church's role in society. So I was telling my students, the politics of Jesus are offensive to all. So then how do we live them out, cooperatively and peacefully in today's culture? Especially with voting in this week, how do you do that as a voting member of today's society and still be true to your Christian values?
Yeah, well, definitely right off the bat, just what you said to your students would be the thing. The politics of Jesus will be offensive to all, just because we're going against our natural going to die. We're going against that. We're going to that. That is not what, as humans, what we want to do. And so, yeah, that definitely would be the thing, that it would look to be something that's offensive to everyone. But the same token, yeah, the same notion that you brought up with being your faith rivaling your family, all those kind of things. These are definitely things that are hard for us to believe and hard to comprehend, but things that Jesus talked about directly. Who is my mother and father? Who is my mother? Who is my brother? Those who, live the same way. Those who follow. Good gosh, I'm forgetting the passage right off the top of my head. We leave that alone. But at the same time, I was talking about this. We were talking about this in a class I was in just a couple of weeks ago as well, and talking about how just our allegiance, we don't know how to worship another way. So when we want to demonstrate what it means to be a patriot, it takes on the same emphasis, the same images, all the same things that's according with our kind of faith religion idea. So we have our sacred songs, we have our sacred people, we have our sacred images, and those images are just as sacred as the things that are bound to our faith religion, so much so that we can't tell the difference. Rivaling one means to rival all of them. So definitely what you said, Matt, is not that maybe we love the country more, but it's right on par. And that is just as evil of it being more.
I uh well, I agree with both of your sentiments about um our theology and our politic needing to offend both liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats. I would push back against that. I understand where you guys are coming from, but I think in our particular context, it actually covers up the real issue. um, I actually don't think, as American Christians, we're called to offend both Democrats and Republicans. Because to say that actually moves us back to the center and continues to affirm the status quo. It, I think it goes along the same lines of whenever we say God doesn't choose a side. No, God does choose a side. He has a preferential side, which we've unpacked before in previous episodes. And so I guess for me, our politics and our theology cannot be beholden to a Democratic agenda or a Republican agenda, but we cannot have a politic or a theology that is middle ground. I feel like that makes it too abstract and it only floats in the air. That's a critique that people will often say of Bart, is that his Jesus always floats above the ground and his Jesus is never firmly on the earth. And so while I want to move, I'm with you guys on the sense that our theology cannot be captive to a certain political agenda. I also think it does not equally offend either Democrats or Republicans. To and as I've been reflecting on the charge that somebody gave to me of, man, Tony, like, because you support Black Lives Matter, you're a socialist, you're a Marxist, you want to destroy the nuclear family. I want to say this. Ancient Christian uh, saying says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. The great Karl Marx. No, just kidding. That's Jesus. That is Jesus. And so if we're talking about destruction of the nuclear family, I think Jesus beats out Karl Marx by a couple hundred years, if not a millennium. And so when we talk about offending Democrats or Republicans, and then we situate ourselves in the middle as Christians to choose the middle way or the third way, I think in the American context, uh, it's much different than if it were in a different national context to say we can't choose either side. I will say, lastly, on this tangent or this tirade, Karl Barth says that as Christians, we cannot, that our initial calling is to be Christians, and it's not to belong to a nation or race or a class. or culture. We have to abandon those things. Those things are secondary to our callings as Christians and to our identities as Christians. So there's no such thing as an African Christian or a Swiss Christian.
Mm.
Now, this isn't to obfuscate or destroy our particularity. It's to say, to your point, Matt, our allegiance cannot be to our particularity. And to, I think the American form of Christianity can be summed up by that man behind your right shoulder, Phil, Billy Graham. Billy Graham is the epitome of American Christianity. But Bart, when he went and saw Billy Graham preached, this is what Bart said. He said, "I am horrified by what I saw." He says what he saw was Billy Graham acting like a madman, and what he presented was certainly not the gospel. So if Billy Graham is the epitome of American evangelicalism, and Bart as a interrogator of our religious systems and practices, I think we have to take seriously Bart's charge of Billy Graham and who Billy Graham represents for us today, and Jesus's words of you have to hate your father and mother, but the continual cultural charge of, oh, Marxists want to destroy the nuclear family. Who do we offend? Because we can't just say we'll offend Democrats and Republicans equally, because there is a party that is pro-life right now. There is a party that is pro the image of God. It may look dialectical, it may look confusing, but there is a political party that is progressing the human race rather than regressing. But I digress.
Wow, you got through all of that and did not mention Bernie Sanders one time. A lot of Karl Barth, but it's all good. Let's think in same terms and not. I want to avoid the easy stance here of going to my political right people and talking against them. Being a critic from within what would be considered the left side of the aisle is a very challenging thing. So when I'm talking about not offending both sides equally, I'm talking about understanding that there is a moral and an ethic that guides the call towards justice. There is a moral and an ethic that doesn't allow you to look at the person opposing you as your enemy, and you not taking tactics that allow that to be the case, where you're not harboring heart in your. One of the things that have been just so painful to me in watching just all the protests that's been happening now, and by and large, I've been excited by watching it. I'm definitely looking at this moment and saying that we're walking into another kind of peak in the movement for civil rights as we've seen in the 60s and the like. We really will. I think we'll be having leaders develop from this time as we've had then. But one of the statements that have come up a lot is the statement of we are not our ancestors. As we see people diving into pro-Trump things and tearing it down, saying, hey, our ancestors wouldn't have done this, and here we are. That's not how we're doing this, because I don't think that's the appropriate way to approach it. We're approaching it by creating an enemy when the whole idea was to create a brother, by demonstrating to them, look at the evils that you're doing. And hopefully that you will look at that and be like, whoa, why am I doing this? And a sense of humanity will then be sparked within you that will turn us into friends and not enemies. But much of what I'm seeing now is very frightening, in the sense that I do think it's creating more enemies, is hardening the division in many regards far more. And that's what I mean by offending both sides, because I would want to say to my people, hey, yo, what is going to be the the fruit of what we're doing here? Yeah, in the end, yeah, there may be some things that people may recognize, some slogans and those kind of things, but are we actually going to create what we actually are looking for, we actually are saying, or are we going to create further divisions and using the same tactics of the oppressor, because that's what we know how to use?
Yeah, and I think, and my thing is with Jesus, based on your own thing, Tony, what you're saying is that he's come to he's going to create division. So whether it's offending equally the Republican and the Democrats, the case is that he's offensive. So I I think it is. I mean, I know we want him to be on one side or the other, but why might that be the problem is that the side that he's on is in the middle, because the only way that the narrow path is illuminated is that it cuts through the crap on both sides, so that the only way that is meant to be shown is the one that goes directly through, so it is center stage, it is middle ground. And so that's where I hear what you're saying, but I think it still is equally offensive to both Republicans and Democrats. It's really, and I guess I should not label them as Republican Democrats, because that's going against even my own belief of labels. I think labels are disastrous. It is equally offensive to the nominal Christian and the non-Christian. Okay, and it is equally life-giving to the one who is pursuing Jesus. Okay, so I think that's where it is. It is really rooted, for the relation to Jesus as opposed to politics, whereas we do it the opposite. We look at what our politics are and how they relate to Jesus. And so we root everything in our politics. So then we have statements like, well, Jesus is offensive to the right or to the left. No. He's offensive to life apart from him, because in union with Christ, there is no offense. In union with Christ, Jesus doesn't become my offense. I become the offense then to the world, because I'm in Christ. And so I think that's what I'm talking about when it comes to the politics of Jesus, that it's too easy though. And I agree with what you're saying, Tony, is but there's not, I push back and say, just because the one party is pro-life, are they really pro-life? You know what I'm saying? So the policies of both parties say one thing, but then they do completely opposite. And so I would be down with a party that would have much more of a socialistic kind of, hey, let's distribute. But even within the Democrats in their Affordable Care Act, there are still limits to the distribution. So to say that the politics of Jesus align with one party more so than the other, I'm like, well, no, I think holistically it's offensive to both. And so that's where I think, and the Christian's not willing to deal with it. They want you to politically be aligned with one party. I just don't think that the Christian can do that. And in fact, the Christian is not even pushing up and saying, hey, look, let's look at these characters, these candidates. Where are they at with Jesus? How many candidates do you know where they're at with Jesus? And so, like, to your point, Tony, if Billy Graham is the epitome or whatever of the Christian preaching, it is horrifying, because, but again, taken from Bart, and let's not jump all over Billy Graham, like thinking about the context of the message and what was he trying to promote, and the way in which you communicated was differently. However, again, because we're talking, we're whether we are our ancestors or not, like we were talking about the same thing, Phil, within this group that I meet in on Mondays, going through, it's a cultural learning group. And what they got into was comparisons of the suffering of older generations and how based on their sufferings, they're greater than what we're dealing with now. And so that the past has more ability to speak into today than today. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I know it doesn't seem like it's suffering, but when this person says they're suffering, and for me to deny that just because based on my standard, it's not true suffering, it denies that person's experience, and it denies that person. So I think in our talk of Christianity and religion and politics, we do need to be mindful that, hey, I can't project my morals onto you because I think that your party is less moral, because historically, and we've gone through this historically, what party was against or for slavery, right? Both parties have had their share of pro or anti. Both parties have had their share with being pro leadership based on worldly standards. So when we say pro-life, some would say, well, the Republicans are more pro-life because look, they're taking care of military and death penalty criminal reform, and the fetus. Others would say Democrats are more pro-life because look, they're taking care of the immigrants at the borders. They don't want to kill the criminals, and then they're allowing the female to be in charge of. So how do we then determine what is more pro-life? So that's where the politics come in, where I think we need to have a statement of saying, okay, well, how could Bart say that Billy Graham is horrifying? Like, what's so horrifying about him? Because he still gives the message that salvation is in Christ. So does Joel Osteen. So what's horrifying about either one of those if their salvation is in Christ, right?
Totally. I think yeah, for me, I think where I'm coming to is it's not a political pessimism, but I think it's a ecclesiological optimism or realism. It's in the sense that, as Bart says, the church is not for the church is for the world, because Christ's mission is to the world. And so for me, I think where I'm processing is whatever politics looks like, it's my Christian duty to engage civically. I have a Christian duty, not just a duty as a citizen, but a duty as a Christian to engage in local and federal politics. But then my primary duty, if I'm to engage holistically in politics, is to the church. And whatever community the church decides to be, it cannot be for itself, but it can only be for the world when it is actually the church. So the church cannot be a political party, because we have this new denomination or network of churches called patriot churches that are forming for the nation, for the gospel, for the kingdom. Patriot churches. And I think those aren't churches, those are just country clubs, crucifying Jesus every Sunday. Like and so the church can only be for the world when the church is the church. But the church needs to model what true justice looks like. And so where I think the church can maintain and further its witness, where it can hold fidelity to its witness, is if it models the type of justice Christians try to enact legislatively. So whatever Christians try to legislate, they must first do that within their house. So before they try to vote people into the house, they must first enact justice in their house. And I think as Christians, before we try to pack the court, we must first ask who the judge is and how we sit under judgment of the judge, which is Jesus. And so in my political realism, in my ecclesiological realism, I want to focus on the church first and reform the church before I try to reform society, while still maintaining civic engagement. I think that's where my heart is really on fire and passionate, because I'm hopeful about the church. I think there's something to be said about people walking away from cultural Christianity and encountering God in the far country. There's something to be said about people no longer being beholden to a false identity and being able to actually see who they are in light of who Jesus is. So I'm with you guys on not allowing our theology to be co-opted by a particular political party, but submitting it in full to Jesus.
Definitely with that, Tony. And man, in just light of in what you're saying, and just in the way that the church ought to model justice and community and whatever else and everything else, be that as a presentation to the world, that is the point where I'm kind of getting pessimistic, where I'm looking at the way we have been modeling it, and I'm wondering, when is it going to turn to, when are we going to be able to be that model for the world, and will the world even care? Just thinking of where we are now in the middle of continued close downs, and churches aren't being able to meet in person and the like, what's going to be the thing that's going to motivate this millions of believers to wander back into churches next year or the year after, when we're able to do so? If I can get my favorite preacher and favorite worship singer on my computer or television set, then why do I need to go out to demonstrate my faith at all? you know and so we won't have the opportunity per se, because that will be mostly the per se nominal Christians that you were mentioning a moment ago, Matt. But there's a kind of a benefit added to it as well, because think of the Christians who are going out to demonstrate the gospel, the ones who are going out to serve people, the ones who haven't stopped in the middle of everything, but are continually serving people. And I'm not necessarily saying that the attention will be garnered to those folks, but those folks will be doing the actual work. And I think that as we are seeing those people do the actual work, and those of us that will be joining those folks doing that actual work, that will be kind of the new model of what the church will be. So there's really an interesting time where this can be a point of revival, or the screaming over TV will get even louder. And then that will be the thing that we'll lean into. But man, I am more so frightened. I'm more so just kind of prepared for the notion of we're going to be more and more internal and just watch everything on television and be more and more consumeristic in how we just do this. So much so that it's going to wipe out, the mom and pop church that's actually out here serving people. But my pessimism doesn't stop there, because politically, I'm just as pessimistic. I know I must engage. I know I have a duty to engage, but I'll be honest. Hey, I don't like any of these folks that's at the top of this ticket. I like one less than the other, so I'm voting for the one that I like less. I mean, I like more, but I don't know. I don't know when we're gonna have political candidates that will represent things that we can actually all stand behind. And people that are, because it's not necessarily even the politics or the policies in particular, but just people that aren't playing games with us.
Mm.
That's the thing, because I think that's some of the thing that folks connected with the guy that's in the office now. He wasn't going to play games with us. He's just playing different games. And so it's kind of scary going forward what we're going to be looking at, just with the different candidates we're going to be looking at going forward. So
Yeah, and the thing is it probably has to start sometime sooner, and this is where it comes back to the church then, because to get people educated as to how they should engage politically, there has to be some training up of the folks, within the church and our church Sunday schools. And like, this is where Bart's comment of the church is meant for the world. Well, how can it be meant for the world though if the people within the church aren't prepared to go into the world? And so then the message that they're bringing, because this is what happens, right, Phil, is that then we're presented with candidates where all of us are like, I'm tired of the discussion to be, well, I'm voting of the lesser of two evils. That means the church has failed. If the candidates that we're putting up both on either one of the parties is not good enough for the church to go, character wise, that person is legit, you know, um, not always agreeing with their policies, right? Because it's the character of the person, and we can then discuss their policies if they have a character that is willing to step into those dialogues, and that's where I think the Dr. King's whole thing is that the content of the person must be the character of that person. It's the soul of the person, so that when we're having a discussion of someone who is vehemently pro-life, that they absolutely 100%, regardless of the situation, but if they're for Christ, then they're willing to sit down and have that discussion and go, how can you be pro-choice? And they both can discuss it. And so I think that's where the politics of Jesus has been completely separated and moved out of it, because the church itself doesn't even understand the politics of Jesus anymore. It's become the politics of society, such that you have guys like Rick Warren, and you have guys like even Billy Graham, and now Franklin Graham, where they get super nestled into the political structure and the framework, that they're not willing to say, hey, look, I'm voting for this president, but ultimately he's not my hope. My hope's in Jesus, and so if the church were doing its duty, to love and serve, it was fulfilling its obligation to raising up, because it had church leaders that not, think about the past, how many church leaders over these last few years continue to come about where they're just absolutely worldly. having sex with their secretaries, being a big bully with the elders, going behind and nestling up to, the president of the United States and claiming that if you don't vote for Trump, then you are part of, the evil cabal kind of thing, but then you have also on the other side calling someone like the president as, some of the language that the left has used as far as the incarnation of evil in this. Doesn't do anything either. And so Christians on both sides have lost their way because why? Who's supposed to be training them up? The politics of Jesus are meant to be played out through the church, but where is the church in today's culture?
Yeah, maybe I'm very young. No, I am very young, but I wonder how my youthfulness shades my perspective. But I oftentimes wonder what the end result of this American religious project will look like. Because we're so young as a nation, and Christianity is so young within the United States. I don't think any of us can predict what the end of this project looks like, but we have indicators that we can learn through history. So anytime that the church identifies itself with a nation, usually things don't go so well. German church, American church. So usually things don't go so well when the church is following after a nation. When Christians begin to become insular, we see throughout history that it produces and breeds fairly cancerous theology. And so we have indicators and markers throughout history. But as far as the Christian project within the United States, I don't think anybody has a sure prediction. And what's fascinating is we continually see guys who were friends in 2016 now diverge. Like a couple days ago, Piper released an article endorsing not Trump. He didn't endorse Biden, he just endorsed not Trump. And then in response, Wayne Grudem comes out with an article saying Piper's wrong. And so these guys are buddies, but then they're falling. And we find ourselves in such interesting times. But with what Phil is saying about the hope for the future, I am hopeful because I think the future of the American church, and I want to say this with sensitivity, the future of the American church, I think we have a lot to be hopeful for, because it's all about laying down privilege and the disavowing of privilege. I think we will come to a space where there's no ethnic or racial majority that's representative of the American church, and people will continually be divorcing themselves from privilege and power, and that gives me hope. When we decide to no longer play the power game, but we play the servant the servant role, where we begin to serve not out of power or pursuit of power, but out of a wholly justified pursuit of the well-being of our neighbor. And so that gives me tremendous hope, not only for the American church, but also the nation as a whole.
Yeah, one more thing before you close us out, Matt. Hey, Tony, your lips to God's ear. Amen on what you just said, brother.
Which is important because we need to continue to encourage one another, because, like my brother Phil, I tend towards more of the skeptical, pessimistic, and I need folks like Tony just continually, lips to my ear saying, dude, this is it, and that's the point, right? And it's not youth anything, Tony. I think it's just good, clear understanding. This is the theological need of today's church, is to have church leaders who are embedded in the education of the church, the theological, going for their doctorates, going for the degrees, so as to not puff up on knowledge, but to become embedded within the history of our church, because this is a faith that is so important, right? Because so often, if you go through life, in our experiences, Phil and myself, have a few years on you and some experiences that you have yet to have, but together then I can live life through the experiences that Phil shares with me and vice versa. And then you can, because guess what? I don't have, some of the experiences that either one of you have because of just where we were born and where we're at, but yet I can have those through you. And that's this sharing, the intensity of our lives together. This is what I think that the unity of the church is meant to be, and this is part of the truth of Christianity. I want to read this to you because so often we take this this idea of suffering and make it to where then we want to eradicate any pain or suffering. This is what Nouwen says. He says, a minister is not a doctor whose primary task is to take away pain. Rather, he deepens the pain to a level where it can be shared. Dr. Metzger used that in one of his blog posts. For those of you that want to Uncommon God on Pathos, he elucidates that and he uses that for the reading Uncommon God, Common God on Pathos. But the idea of suffering doesn't need to be removed, because in it then we share each other's common experiences, but I only share those through when you relate to me through your lives. And so we can encourage and walk together, right? That's what Jesus did. And so, and for those of you that are watching, this is what it's all about at New Wine. It's this collective group who seeks the heart of Christ so as to build relational bridges in Jesus, in contemporary culture. And that happens when we're together. And this is a theological education. It's a relational education. It's the education of life. And we do this together. So on behalf of Tony and Phil, this is yet another episode of New Wine Uncorked. I'm Matt Farlow, and we totally appreciate you joining us this day. Get your friends together for next week. Every Tuesday, we're doing this and we drop the video and stuff. You can even check us out, because every now and then we go live on twitch.tv. Check me out as well. Anchor.fm for our podcast, YouTube for the videos, Facebook Live on Thursdays. New Wine's got it going on because Jesus has got it going on for 2,000 years for our behalf, and he's asking us to do the same for each other. So in this next week, you know what you as a Christian can be doing? The greatest thing that we can be doing this next week is being praying for our nation, so that the peace of God will surpass all understanding and grip us up as the Christians start to rise up and live out that love of Christ. So on behalf, again, Tony and Phil, this has been another edition of New Wine Corked. I'm Matt Farlow. We'll see you on the flip side.